I'm Pushpa Arabindoo. I'm an associate professor in geography and urban design at University College London. I'm not sure if you know, I have a very varied pedagogical training. I began with architecture studies as an undergraduate student in India, moved on to do urban design at a master's level in New York, and finished with a PhD in urban planning at the London School of Economics. This interdisciplinary training brought me to the critical discourse of urban studies, where I find myself situated amidst a very exciting array of scholarship that seeks to provincialize, decolonize what is still a very West-dominated understanding of urbanization across the world. It kind of gained a lot of significance for myself because of my research focus on the Indian city of Chennai, where I have been doing investigations of its urban transformations since 2002 around a multitude range of aspects, from middle-class activism to subaltern politics. All of this kind of began to cohere together around the question of ecological imagination, where I began to, where I ask about and wonder about challenges of water, nature, and waste in the city. It also prompted me to engage with the broader debates within urban studies as I wondered about how the particularity of a city like Chennai speaks to at a theoretical level, to the planetary discourses within urban studies. So this kind of empirical expeditions within Chennai and taking them across to a theoretical conversation was a challenge that I began to engage with in more recent times. This meant that I began to consider eventually a monograph on Chennai, and I was inspired by the work of radical urbanists such as Mike Davis, who has produced a number of volumes on Los Angeles in the nature of something that's more than just an urban biography. The idea of writing a monograph on Chennai was what brought me to the Institute in the first place. I came here as a UCL fellow in 2017-18, but as soon as I arrived here and I started working on the monograph, I realized that it cannot be in a conventional format. I kind of eschewed that for more heterodox, non-linear possibilities, where different thematic pursuits within the city emerged to tell stories on their own. They're kind of interlinked, they speak to each other, but it's not necessary to weave them together into a broader narrative. They remain as collages more than a linear storytelling format. So this year, as I continue as a fellow at the Institute, it's one of the chapters that I'm looking at in greater detail. What I'm doing is I'm taking, one of the chapters documents all the debates around the city's open spaces or the lack of, and what are the appropriate analytical filters we have to understand them. So mostly within urban studies, open spaces are understood through the discourse or the filter of the public, but scholars proposing a Southern theorization argue that the notion of the public is a European construct, and it's perhaps not appropriate in southern cities, cities of the global south. I began with this proposition to ask myself, how can we understand the debate around open spaces and the challenges it poses conceptually and theoretically? I looked at whether we need to reject the idea of the public and maybe embrace more other possibilities, and commons, the notion of the commons is one, for instance. And this question of whether it's the public or the commons was something I looked in great detail in this chapter. What I found is very interesting, and that constitutes the bigger aspiration of my research fellowship here at the Institute this year, is that it's not so clear-cut, these kind of polarizing debates around the inappropriateness of concepts across global north and global south. So there is no such thing as the public being a totalizing European idea. It has morphed and transformed itself into into applicability within the Global South context, at least in the case of Chennai. And I also find problematic aspects with the idea of the commons, which is often promoted as a more homegrown idea. More importantly, public and the common entangle with each other in very complex and often messy ways. So it means then that, you know, what is the conceptual vocabulary that is available for open spaces? The possibilities are not neat terminologies. They vary and they overlap, and this is what I'm trying to do at the moment. And as a bigger project, my hope is that through my presence in Paris, I can work with French scholars to ask whether this is just a language question, whether this is something that's preoccupying only Anglophone scholars. How do French scholars work with notions of the public, notions of the commons? How do they engage with this need for a vocabulary for open spaces across different cities? So possibly I would like to propose a larger comparative project which will bring together Anglophone and Francophone scholars to investigate multiple sites across the global north and the global south, to emphasize the fact that these are notions that travel in very unexpected ways, and we have to be open to all kinds of possibilities.